Hello, my name is Dr. Douglas Sadownik, and welcome to Psychology for the People in the new field study series I'm introducing here. Today's video is the psychology of authoritarianism, the mind as governing body. I've been away from YouTube for about a year because I was man crazy trying to finish my first major book in a long while, Healing Gay Sex and Love. It's a psychological novel about four men in group therapy with their doctor, Dr. Glitter. It's out now. It's really for anyone. It's very funny, but also has a lot of serious shit in it. And you can get it on Amazon as a paperback or as a digital product, which you can actually find in the description section. I've been a therapist for 30 years and founded the Antioch LGBT specialization in clinical psychology. And I'm now returning to my life as novelist, author, journalist, but most of all, an activist, as my work is always about you and me and our society and how to be the best citizens we can be, which to my mind means understanding our psychology better than we have been taught so far. There's a free PDF for you about fighting internalized homophobia and another PDF about why to find a therapist. I'm giving a free reading discussion via Zoom on Healing Gay Sex and Love this Wednesday, February 18th from 2 to 3, and there's a sign-up sheet in the description. The deeper feeling I'm having, and I know many of you are feeling it too, which has to do with the rising fascist tendencies and authoritarianism in our body politic. The country has never seen an entity like ICE operate so completely outside the law, and a whole series of other things are also taking place. Corrupt pardons layered on top of the extraordinary pardons granted to those involved in January 6th, a Justice Department hollowed out and then repurposed for investigation of political enemies, from the chair of the Federal Reserve to Governor Walz in Minnesota to Mayor Frey. Then the tariffs imposed by Fiat on our allies, the fixation on Greenland, the repeated threats of tariffs again by executive decree. So I just thought it'd be really important to comment on these regime changes, and thank goodness for the resistance that's actually a bulwark against them, and to do so a bit differently than some of my favorite political commentaries, The Bulwark, Heather Cox Richardson, Midas Touch, just because those podcasts are really, really great, but they're not touching on the deeper psychology involved in authoritarianism. And I think that's just really important for us to do if we're to actually affect any change. For example, I was listening to a fantastic podcast featuring the great historian of Russia, Soviet Union, Stephen Kotkin. He was talking about the difficulty of getting rid of an authoritarian leader like Putin, and about how the structures of fascism go deep into the organization of government itself. And as he was describing this, I found myself wanting to scream at YouTube. I was thinking, well, yeah, he's talking about these structures and how deep they go and cutting off the head of the leaders and going to really adjust the deeper structures. And he was not talking about psychoanalysis or Freud. And of course, no one does. There's this huge divide between those of us who study psychoanalysis. Some people become actually psychoanalysts, and it's a rich, wonderful field, and just about everybody else. And it's important, I think, to try to bridge that gap, because maybe people who are more extroverted are actually focused on extroverted issues such as political science, and those folks are more introverted oriented, work therapy and study and do research. So it could be that there's typological differences as to why these two fields that pertain to the life of our democracy and its futurity are kept separate. I'll give you a little bit of an example about how I think fascism works in the mind, and I'd like to be able to do that more often. I'm sitting in a session with a perfectly ordinary person who is trying to decide whether or not to, let's say, leave his wife. He'll say, well, doctor, I really don't like her. And almost immediately, another voice will say, well, I shouldn't say that. That's so judgmental. And then another voice starts whining, almost like a child, when I point out the inconsistency between one voice that says, I really don't like her, and another one says, well, I almost really fast, well, I better not talk that way. So it doesn't occur to this fellow, who's otherwise extremely intelligent, that there are different parts of the mind, different internal structures, and they are working at cross purposes. So let's say a child voice says, I don't really like her. And then a more parental voice says, we shouldn't speak like that. And then an even more infantile voice starts to whine when faced with the anxiety that comes with being confronted about those inconsistencies. And these parts of the mind are not talking to each other. In fact, it could be that one mind is in Pluto and another one is on Mars. It's that separated, and one could say that maybe a good therapy is trying to help people identify these different part cells, and different schools of psychology have different terms for how they talk about the splitting dynamic. But let's say, suffice to say, that all of us are to a certain extent schizophrenic, but not in a psychotic sense, although that could be argued, insofar as there are different personalities inside of us. That's the really great discovery of depth psychology, and we are just coming to terms with it. And we're seeing one part of the personality, which is the fascist part, being played out in world politics. And it's because we can't see that inside of ourselves, it seems to me, that gets acted out as fate in the body politic. So sometimes I despair, quickly we can get a handle on this, because helping patients see this takes some time. And one doesn't want to rush because it's the patient's agenda one must follow. But pointing these things out, of course, could be what happens in a more serious therapy, and maybe something that is taking place more than once a week. Because otherwise, it's really just about maintenance and helping people sort of manage the stress of life, and perhaps not so much about deeper insight into the deeper structures. So maybe it might be useful in this early understanding to talk about psychoanalysis, not so much as a theory of how to do therapy, but as a political philosophy. And people sometimes think that Freudian psychoanalysis is dead science, but the truth of the matter is rather not. There are hundreds of institutes blossoming throughout the world. Many of them are post-Freudian. They're very relational. They don't let the patient just sit and talk necessarily without some engagement, relational engagement. Many of them are anti-racist, LGBT affirmative, most engaged with the political issues of our time, although most people don't know about this. And when I talk about psychoanalysis, often with my own patients, they just look at me as if I'm speaking a strange language. But it is probably the most sophisticated, incisive technology we have, like almost one could say an MRI, to look into the effects, because of course one can't see into the mind really, but the effects of the different governing bodies and what they're saying and what they're doing through language, through feeling, and through relationship. What we're really looking here at, in terms of maybe getting a better handle on why it looks like some people are allowed to pull the wool over our heads through their sociopathy and the use of aggression and charisma, and others are more masochistic and sort of passive and waiting for someone to come and rescue us, or some type of change, is maybe one way to focus that is to look at Sigmund Freud. And I will talk about how it is so useful to understand Freud in a less biased way. Oh my goodness, he was homophobic and he did cocaine, and a lot of his findings are not necessarily true, which is, I suppose, somewhat true. Actually, as I'll talk about, some of the point, Freud's really not that homophobic. All of his case histories actually concern the subject of homosexuality, male, and female, maintain that everyone was really bisexual in the unconscious, homosexual in the unconscious, and bisexual in lived reality. But that's another story. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But at least to the extent that Freud and his followers, and then of course Jung, who then broke from Freud, C.G. Jung, the basic idea was the understanding that our conscious mind is actually only a small part of who we are. And the vast part of who we are, a personality, again, this is the major hypothesis, is in the unconscious. The unconscious is not some faraway place that we can never venture into. It is right in front of us, and everyone can see it, it would seem. Like I mentioned with our fellow in psychotherapy, the part of him that's he doesn't like his wife, the part of him feels judgmental about not liking his wife, the other part that's whining. I mean, there's so many other parts as well. But it is in a way that maybe Copernicus helped us see that the sun did not revolve around the earth. Rather, the earth revolved around the sun. It's that big a discovery. Now, of course, people somewhat understand this, and you can have all your nighttime dreams where somebody is making those stories and those interesting dilemmas and those persecutions, but it's not your conscious personality. So who the heck is doing that? Jung would suggest it's the archetype of the self, which is vaster and bigger than anything Freud might have mentioned, is still very interesting from a Freudian perspective. Where are these dreams coming from? One simple way to focus about what is the unconscious, the different drives that are there, the life drive, the death drive, sexual needs, violence, aggression. We often have a very dark view of aggression, but that's because Judeo-Christian myth of meaning split off aggression. We could look at Nietzsche for how that happened, so that we don't have access to it. So, of course, it comes out in most folks who are deemed sociopathic. But as we know in psychotherapy, healthy aggression is necessary to get one's needs met, to have agency and to also have good sex. So, but let's take a look at some major discoveries Freud comes up with in 1923 in a book that is called The Ego and the Id. And his previous framework only suggested that there was the life instinct, the libido instinct, and had to do with, let's say, a topographical model, which is something of a map. I'll get into that later. What shifts Freud into understanding what's called the structural model is that he saw there was so much violence in the world that his patients couldn't help but repeat their compulsions towards their pathology, and that there was a secret monologue happening in the patient that he hadn't paid attention to before that was really nasty in reference to the self and to also the therapist. He began to see that there were different agencies in the unconscious, and he called them by these names: the id, the ego, and the superego. And you might have learned this in high school or something, but it's so important. The id might be, let's say, where the child place is, but also where the needs, the instincts, and the basic animal part of us is. The ego, and I need to spend a whole of a lot more time on this, because people think the ego is something about your narcissism and you're too much in your head and you're too full of yourself. But in psychology, the ego really means that me that can mediate between all of the things that are happening in the unconscious and all of the things that are happening between you and me. And most importantly, can take the emotional material that comes from the id and from my experiences with you and me and metabolize them, the reality principle. A healthy ego, which is really the goal of every good therapy, or ought to be, it really has to do with the person coming into their own, is often equated with self-esteem. And then the superego, which should be the basic ideal of who we are supposed to be, but because of our training and the cultivation and the issue of childism, that children are actually to be seen and not heard, are not real people, but are products and effects and personal belongings of their parents. The superego in this stage of evolution is quite critical, quite nasty, quite vicious, and also bent on the destruction of the individual if it's a very acute level. Why that is, and how the instinct of life goes to the ego and the instinct of death goes to the superego is the subject for another video. But I think the place I want to end on now is because of most of our inability to get a handle on our superego, which is actually often our higher power, whether we like it or not. Some people who, let's say, resist going to a recovery meeting and say, I don't like the idea of the higher power, may be surprised to learn that their actual critical function, unfortunately, it seems to most people, is the higher power, maybe unconscious. This issue of the critical voice does a couple of things. It mitigates against healthy aggression, but it also mitigates against the individual waking up to the bullshit that is happening around them, especially, let's say, with their own parents. Because the superego is saying, don't you dare expose your parents. Don't you dare look at what's really happening. And don't you dare have healthy anger. And who do you think you are for even having any feelings? You are just a monster, at best. And it's where also the issues of bad self-esteem come from, not necessarily from the past, although yes, but from the fact that the superego function hasn't been named or addressed. So I'm making an analogy here between how we could have elected somebody who would really cause a regime change. Thank goodness he's so out of it that it's all falling apart. we'll see if we even have elections, according to some political theorists, although because, of course, the threat to nationalize the elections and to go after those democratic states is something that hasn't been fully really thought through, although some people are starting to. But it seems to me that the real problem is that most of us are very unaware of the superego presence in our own lives as the critical father, the critical mother, whose voice is distinct from the id and from the ego or from the me who's becoming more conscious. So that's where I want to end for today. I have a lot more to go. I want to talk a lot more about the news. I want to try my best to stay on top of the news, but to really talk about it in terms of how the issue of waking up to totalitarianism in our own body politic is perhaps correlated with those people who are on the streets and are unconsciously perhaps reacting against their own superego or their own naivete around their superego. I'm sure that's happening unconsciously, but how that could be sped up through each of us waking up to the three parts of the mind and our relationships to the id, the animal part, the superego, the critical part, and where we are in our conscious individuation process to really, really have much better boundaries and containment processes around these different agencies. Of course, if we turn to other psychologists, we'll get different terms, different terminology, whether it's Wilhelm Reich or C.G. Jung or existential psychologists or feminist psychologists or LGBT ones. But I think the basic breakthrough is, in my opinion, in this discovery of the unconscious and the different agencies or persons that are in there about whom we remain unconscious, but we don't have to. So that's my political report for today. Love it if you could support the channel, hit the like button, subscribe to get notified about future videos, and check me out for my books and also for that Zoom session that I referred to about Healing Gay Sex and Love Wednesday. This Wednesday, the day after the eclipse, that is February 18th from 2 to 3:30, and I'd love to see you there. Thank you so much. I'm curious to know how you are handling your own superego function. If you can identify it, ask me any questions about that, and I'll try to address them in future videos. Good luck with all of this. Stay in the resistance, stay strong, and do your inner work. Thanks. It's Dr. Doug. Bye-bye.